Hey, my friends. I'm Mary Rose Wood. I'm an author. I'm a writing teacher. I'm the founder of Path of the Storyteller, where I offer training and mentorship to help writers write better than they ever dreamed they could. And I am so pleased to be here. Every Wednesday, I go live on this YouTube channel to talk with you about writing craft. And when I say writing craft, I also mean story structure, because I believe that telling a great story is the foundation of any good writing. So before we get started with today's discussion about what makes a great ending, let me remind you, if you're watching on Facebook, to just go to streamyard.com/Facebook and give me permission to see your name. You don't have to, but it's lovely. You know my name, and it would be lovely to know yours. I love when you guys participate in the comments. It's great to have a dialogue. I love to hear your writing questions, so don't be shy. It really adds to the conversation for everyone. And waving to some of my regulars who are here. Hey, Rosalind, it's great to see you. It is exciting. Rosalind says it is going to be exciting today. It is all about the big finish. And you're so right, Rosalind. Endings are important in a story in a very special way. I mean, you don't have to run a circus to know that you save the main attraction, the moment we've all been waiting for, the one that's got the drum roll and that's what you save to the end. And it's for a reason, of course. We want to keep our readers engaged until the very last page. We don't want to give them everything they've come for, 30 pages from the end, because it's what we call an anticlimax. It doesn't incentivize them to keep going. We want to keep that balloon in the air all the way to the very end. So it truly is a big finish. The other thing, of course, is that when we have a great beginning, that makes a great first impression, and we need to have a great beginning. But the ending of our story is what leaves the final impression. First impressions are important. Final impressions are, in a way, more important, because by the time they get to the end, our reader has made a significant investment in time. They've taken this journey with us. They've been reading along for thousands of words, hundreds of pages perhaps, and they want to feel that it was worth it. And the feeling that they get when they get to the last words of the book is their impression of the book. They're going to walk away with that. When someone asks them, "What did you think of that book?" that feeling is what they're going to communicate. Now, I will share with you one of my favorite books, as you know by now, if you've been watching these videos, is Jane Eyre. And to this day, I often reread Jane Eyre as time permits. And to this day, I remember the feeling that I got when I first read Jane Eyre. And it's the feeling that I get every time I read Jane Eyre, which is you get to the end of the book and you close it and you just kind of hug it to your heart and you say, "Oh, that was so good." And then, what's your first impulse? Is maybe to go back to the beginning and read it again, or to call a friend who loves it and talk about it. So this is the power of a great ending. It has a big impact on the reader. Now, how do we write a great ending? How do we know what's going to be satisfying to the reader? We don't want to disappoint them. And I would love, leave in the comments if you've ever read anything or sat through, storytelling covers all genres and means of storytelling. If you've ever watched a movie or sat through the climactic final episode of a beloved television series, only to be dumbfounded at how they ended it and literally be like, that's the best they could do. I mean, that's a thing that happens. Now we have social media. So when people don't like the ending, we hear about it, and the showrunners hear about it too. I can think of a few examples of that, right? There was a big hue and cry about the ending of Game of Thrones. People didn't like it, The reader is invested. The reader is invested. We don't want to disappoint them. So I want to talk for a minute about what makes an ending satisfying. And as we talk about the qualities that make an ending a good ending. We'll also weave in, as much practical guidance on how to do it as we can. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is this notion of I've just got a couple of notes here. This notion of satisfying, like what does it mean for an ending to be satisfying? I feel like there's two types of satisfaction that the reader is looking for. They're looking for logical satisfaction. They want the way the story ends to make sense. They want it to, as much as is required, to tie up the loose ends of the tale, to not leave substantial questions dangling. Now, there is a continuum, right? There's a spectrum of closed versus open endings that writers can choose to play with. Um, a, a closed ending is one where all of the threads have been tied up. We know the fate of the main characters. Any big dramatic questions have been resolved. And honestly, most of the mainstream storytelling, most storytelling that's endured, a lot of the kinds of stories that people are most attached to have pretty closed endings. They have a kind of a solid sense of like, well, we know what happens at the end, right? It's not the only type of ending to write, and which is why I mentioned this alternative of a more open ending. A lot of wonderful fiction is written intentionally with an open ending where the author has decided to leave a certain circumstances for the reader to interpret, for the reader themselves to say, the author's not telling me what happens next. They're leaving it up to me to decide. And, when done well, that is also a very sophisticated and thought-provoking ending. And that is the satisfaction of the open ending. If we've created enough of a context for the question that the reader is both satisfied and intrigued and challenged and willing to grapple with the questions that we leave them. If we've left them interesting questions that we've developed over the course of the narrative, that's a very satisfying ending as well. So let's, bear those two things in mind. Tying everything up in a bow, there's nothing wrong with that. Readers love it. As a writer, it's really fun to do because you get the pleasure of bringing everything to a conclusion. It's like the end of a song. When you get to that chord at the end, like it just feels like, yep, that's it. I nailed it. But the open ending is also something to bear in mind. It's not wrong. The only way that these endings are wrong is if you're trying to do a closed ending and you fail to tie up important plot threads. Or if you're trying to do an open ending and you haven't sufficiently created the context for the important questions that you want to leave in your reader's care, that you just throw them confusion at the end, or you just back away, slamming down the lights. There's this sort of famous controversial ending to the TV show The Sopranos, where at the very end of the series, the screen just goes black. And again, people were really, really excited, positively and negatively, by how much of a debate the writers left in the minds of the viewer, right? We're leaving it up to you to decide. Did they plant clues as to what they thought happened all along? Maybe they did. So these things become like puzzles to solve, and those are very engaging as well. So we have open endings and closed endings, and this has to do with the reader's desire for some kind of logical satisfaction. All right. So that's the mind. Logic is in the mind, but the mind is, not the main thing when it comes to creating art and satisfying our readers. The heart is. And so the reader also wants emotional satisfaction. Okay. So where does emotional satisfaction come from? If you watched last week's live stream, which I thought was tremendous fun and actually of great benefit, about how story structures can be interpreted according to the rules of the beauty makeover, you will know that the emotional satisfaction that the reader gets at the end of a story comes from the transformation. It comes from how we feel about the journey of change that the protagonist or hero has been through. So, what is satisfying? What makes transformation satisfying? Well, first of all, if the transformation is sufficient, so we don't take a hero at the beginning of a novel length work and bring them, as they say, from A to B. It's not enough. It's not enough. We really want to bring them all the way to the end of the alphabet. We want to take our hero on a journey of substantial, irrevocable change so that the person that they've become as a consequence of the events of the story is palpably different. They have gone through something. Either they've learned something essential, they've uh, uh, transformed on the spiritual plane to be a much greater person than they were before, a more good person. Think of Ebenezer Scrooge, right? Wonderful story in Dickens' A Christmas Carol of a person who undergoes an enormous spiritual transformation over the course of the tale. We want Ebenezer Scrooge level transformation on an emotional level that is incredibly satisfying to the reader. So when you're working on a tale, when you're outlining a book or drafting a book, ask yourself if the transformation that you have in store for your hero approaches that level of Ebenezer Scrooge. Are you taking them from one state of consciousness to the other end, right? The end of the line. That's where you want to take them. All right. So the scale of the transformation, is it enough? Is it enough change to emotionally satisfy the reader? All right, here's another thing that the reader's going to get satisfaction from. A big change, yes. A meaningful change? Is it an important change? Does this change matter? Does it, to continue the Ebenezer Scrooge example, does this change make us feel exalted? Does it give us that awestruck feeling of, look what happened? That's incredible. How much is possible? Does it make us feel something about the human capacity for transformation? Does it make us reflect on timeless human values, of goodness and generosity and family? Is it about something? We don't put our hero on a journey of transformation from start to finish, where at the end, the thing that's changed about them is meaningless, is trivial. It may be a huge change, but it doesn't signify anything. It doesn't arouse any deep sense of insight or wisdom in the reader. So we definitely want meaningful change on an emotional level. And I guess the last thing that I would say that the reader is looking for emotional satisfaction is how closely you've been able to keep them attached to your protagonist all the way through. So if you've written a rollicking tale that's full of adventure and it has a million characters in it, and at some point along the way your hero got lost in the sauce, got kind of lost in the crowd, and the ending is action packed and maybe the world looks very different, so you could say, well, there's transformation, but your hero is not at the center of it. If your hero is just one of many, that is not satisfying, because that hero is our reader's ride through the story. Like, that's the bike they're on, and that's the experience that they're having. Many aspects of writing craft are designed to both create and sustain your readers, like close identification with the hero all the way through. When we talk about point of view, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about having either a first person narrator or a third person narrator. It doesn't matter. We're still aligning the point of view in a way that is designed to make our reader identify with the journey that the hero is on. So all of those things help provide emotional satisfaction to the reader. Substantial change, meaningful change, and a sense of identification with the hero being at the center of the change. We're not just watching the world change, we're watching the hero change. That's the ride we're on. Now, we've talked in the past about seeing stories that have inside, the inside transformation and the outside transformation, right? Internal and external. And that this dance of the internal and external is part of what we can do when we write fiction, because we have that incredible capacity to not only depict thrilling action scenes and adventures and journeys, but also to dive deep into somebody's psyche and to portray the inner life of another in words. It is the magic of writing fiction. It is the true superpower of writing fiction, is this capacity to be inside the head of another. And so that's important. That's important too. That the change that is depicted at the end is evident internally and externally. But if we leave out the internal and it's just external change and our hero's personal journey of transformation kind of got pushed to the side, the reader's going to be disappointed. All right. Now, let me just check the questions here. Oh, let's see. So this is a great question. I'll take it now, Rosalind. So how much should a good ending involve how the protagonist changes others as well as themselves? This is exactly right. An insightful question, and just what I'm alluding to when I talk about the internal and external qualities of transformation as shown in a satisfying ending. I believe, and I am, as you know, inspired by the work of Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, modality for thinking about not just story structure, but what it means to be human and how change happens, how we grapple with the experience of being human. That's why I like the hero's journey, because I feel like that's what it explores, and I feel that is what storytelling explores. So these are, they are aligned. That's why it's so great for writers to study the hero's journey. One of the significant phases that happens in a third act, and when we talk about endings, we're talking about the third act, third of three, is that the hero transforms into someone who's capable of sacrifice for others. No, not to say that some heroes wouldn't have that capacity earlier in the story, but the events of the tale, of a well-structured tale, that follow your hero on a clearly defined mission to do something, right? All through the second act, they're undergoing test after test as they strive to get to the ordeal, the thing that they've set out to do. Some might call it the plot. I call it the mission. When they get there, they are, not finished in their development yet. That's only the end of the second act. That ordeal, this mission that they've set out to do, when they reach the culminating climactic, showdown at the end of the second act, it's not going to go the way they expected. This is where we have the opportunity for something unexpected to happen, for some unforeseen consequences to take over and propel our hero out of the mission that they thought they were on. I mean, they were on a mission, but the meaning of the mission now gets revealed in this incredibly deep and expansive way. And now they're in the third act, and now they discover what they have truly been preparing for all along. And some of it may feel new, some of it may be a surprise, but what the reader wants to feel as we arrive in the third act and our hero has to kind of clean up the mess they've made or deal with the unexpected consequences of the end of the second act ordeal. The reader wants to see that everything that's come before is now important, that all of the lessons learned, all of the ways in which our hero has grown and changed, every test, every reward, every ally that they've made, that they were all but a preparation for this sort of final showdown, this test, Not like a second act test, but kind of like a final exam. It's like if the second act is full of tests, the third act is the SAT. Like this is where you've got to show it all at the same time. You've got to deliver the goods, and the stakes are super high. So the reader wants to know that all that stuff wasn't random. Just as if you were an athlete and your idea of your ultimate goal was, I'm going to win an Olympic medal. I'm going to get into the Olympics and win an Olympic medal. And your sport is swimming. You don't train on the track. We don't take our hero through an arduous series of tests, an action-packed second act with a deepening at the midpoint and an urgent movement toward the end of act ordeal, only to then decide that in the third act, we've trained them for something else, and now we're going to give them a fresh task. What we want to do is surprise the reader, but also let them intuit that I wasn't expecting this to happen at the third act, and neither was the hero, but everything the hero has gone through has brought them into readiness for this moment. So part of that readiness, Rosalind, is this expansion of the hero's interest. It's no longer just about them getting what they want, fixing their problem, achieving their thing, whatever it was. It is now clear to the hero in the third act that the outcome of this journey affects others. It's not just about them. It's going to have an impact in the larger world. This is not just, do I feel better or worse? This is, if I fail, others will suffer as a consequence, or if I succeed in this mission, it is because others are looking to me to succeed, that my success is important. There's so many examples that we could throw out. I'll go back to my favorite Hobbit example, because the movement from the second act to the third act just happens to be crystal clear there, as it is in many well-structured books. But the mission that our little friend Bilbo, the hero of the story, has been on is quite clear and consistent all through the second act of the book. He's traveling to the Lonely Mountain to meet up with this dragon named Smaug, who is sitting on a hoard of gold that has been alleged actually is the ancestral fortune of this group of dwarves that have taken Bilbo along with them on this journey. Bilbo's job is to be the burglar. They've given him a very specific role. He's small and clever, and he's supposed to go in there and somehow steal the gold back. It's never made quite clear how they expect Bilbo to do this, but that's the mission. So Bilbo gets there. At the end of the second act, he comes in the scene that the reader has been expecting all along. He comes face to face with this dragon. And does he steal some gold? He does. Does he demonstrate that he himself still needs some spiritual development? Yes, he does, because he also pockets something that he finds particularly attractive. And if you recall, when we meet Bilbo, he's extremely concerned about his possessions. His pantry must be full, his silverware, his tidy hobbit hole. This whole journey of discomfort has taken him outside his zone of familiarity. It's challenged him to become braver and more daring and more tolerant of discomfort, and to step into a leadership role and to save his friends over and over again. I mean, he has sacrificed himself or put himself at risk for his friends already quite a number of times. So we've seen this incredible incremental transformation in Bilbo. But when he gets to the ordeal, we see that there's two things. We see that he does it. He's brave and clever, and he actually does do the best he can. And he gets out of there alive, which is incredible. And he also pockets something that he shouldn't. For those of you who know the book, it's called the Arkenstone. There's all kinds of backstory about it, but it's something that's not his to take, and he takes it. Luckily, he does, because it comes in very useful later on, but there's just a glimmer of greed and, secrecy and a little dishonesty still left in Bilbo. But that's not going to be the case for long, because what is the unexpected consequence of all of this? The dragon is furious. Nobody thought this through, right? The dragon is now really angry. The dragon goes on a rampage, torches the nearby town. Many, many casualties, many are killed, and eventually is killed by one of the men of the town. Story over? Dragon's dead? Absolutely not, because now nobody's guarding the gold. That dragon, as it turns out, was, the nuclear deterrent. He was the creature the threat of whose wrath made everyone leave the gold alone to begin with. But now that he's gone, a war breaks out, known to Tolkien fans as the War of the Five Armies. This is the third act of The Hobbit, and it is caused because Bilbo has been on this single-minded mission all along. It's been wonderfully written, test after test, all kinds of, great dynamics, fabulous archetypal energies, this beautifully depicted incremental transformation. But the third act is so much bigger, deeper, richer. The stakes are so much higher. All of a sudden, we have 5 armies marching to collide. It is wartime in a serious, serious way. Footnote here, for those of you that love a little biography along with your story structure training, Tolkien himself had an experience as a soldier in World War I. And so much of what you can find in The Hobbit has to do with the experience of being a soldier who was sent to march halfway across the world and try to save everyone from destroying each other. And loses friends along the way. It's a really fascinating biographical study. So that's just a footnote. You can go look that up and learn about that. But the point of the Bilbo now has to do everything he's learned, but at like top volume and double speed. All the bravery, all the cleverness, all the strategy, the willingness to be physically brave and wandering through battles. And I mean, he has an incredible experience in the third act. He never would have been able to do this at the beginning of the tale. And the reader is thrilled because we feel, as they say, in good hands, that we know that Bilbo has been preparing for this, even though he didn't know this was going to happen. Nobody knew this was going to happen. But Bilbo has been preparing for it since page 1. That's good storytelling. And now we are in a third act that feels satisfying and surprising. And Bilbo ultimately has to do, circling back to what your question was, Rosalind, Bilbo ultimately has to be willing to sacrifice his own life and everything that he has been promised, all of the riches that were supposed to be his share of the gold, his friendship with Thorin. He has to stand on principle. He is a little fellow, but in the world of this story, he stands taller than anyone because he's able to stand on principle and be willing to sacrifice himself to put an end to this terrible war, which he now sees he unwittingly had a role in provoking. So his willingness to sacrifice is so important. It's not just the completion of his spiritual journey. By the end, is if he fails to be his best self, the self that he's been turning into page after page after page, it's just destruction. It is a wipeout. It is a massive, massive war. And he could stop it. Why? Because of all he's been through, right? He doesn't arrive at the third act and become somebody new now. He gathers together all of the transformation, all of the tools, all of the skills, all of the interchange, and tops it up with that final cherry on the cupcake, which is exactly what you say, Rosalind, which is the willingness to sacrifice for the sake of others. So that is a really powerful archetypal truth of the hero's journey, the hero with 1,000 faces, as Joseph Campbell called it, that at the very end, the hero's willingness to sacrifice is what tips the balance. It's what brings the story to fulfillment. So I wanted to before I move on to uh well, no, let me move on. I think this is a great segue. So one of the things that people talk about in terms of what makes a satisfying ending is this bookend of words that are so contradictory that it's enough to make you roll your eyes, right, in frustration. That a great ending should be surprising yet inevitable. How can something be both? But we hear this phrase, the surprising yet inevitable, as the gold standard of an ending that really, really works. So think about this little saga that I've just told about Bilbo. What is surprising is what happens as a consequence of the ordeal. What is surprising is the sort of new, bigger, worse set of problems that rise up in the third act. It's like at the end of the second act, somebody opens Pandora's box. You know, the myth of Pandora's box, and all the demons fly out. Now the real stuff that this story has been about all along is in plain view. That story was never about a dragon. It was always about greed. And now we can see it. The dragon's dead, but greed still needs to be slain. And so that sense of surprise and inevitability comes from how deftly the storyteller is able to convert this journey that we've been on into what it meant all along. The war is a surprise, but it's also inevitable because the storyteller was always writing a story about greed, right? It's just that it was being told in physical symbols. It was being acted out on the outside. But now it cracks open. As the story crosses the threshold from second act to third act, the Pandora's box like opens up, and now we really get to see what's been going on all along. So it is both a surprise, and yet it's been there all along. And that's what that phrase means in a practical sense, that the storyteller can really think about what their story's been about all along. That's what happens in the third act. Your reader's so smart. You know, your reader is going to know right away if what comes out of Pandora's box, if the unexpected consequences of what happens at the end of the second act have been set up properly. If the groundwork has been laid, if there's a sense not of or not only of surprise, but of surprise and recognition at the same time. Aristotle wrote about this, you know, the power of the recognition, the moment when all is revealed, right? It can be as overt, as literal as in a detective story where Sherlock Holmes reveals who did it, or you know, Columbo comes on and reveals. So this quality of revelation, of the truth being revealed, in a third act is a standard trope. You know, that's something that really, really works beautifully. But the true thing that's being revealed is the meaning of the tale. What has this been about all along? What have we been talking about? We've been talking about greed, and the neat structure, the neatness and the precision of the structure of how the hero has used that second act adventure to be exactly who is needed to save the day in the third act. So if you can line that stuff up as a storyteller, that's how you get to the holy grail of the ending that is surprising yet inevitable. So I hope that's helpful. I have one more aspect of what makes a really great ending yet to talk about, but I'm just going to take a moment and check out some of these awesome comments and observations that are coming in. Oh, this is Terry. Nice to see you here, Terry. Terry throws in an example. John Irving, a fine writer, Prayer for Owen Meany is an example of how the hero's oddness has been the path to greatness from the beginning. Incredibly astute observation, Terry. Thank you for sharing that. When you start to look for this, when you start to look for it, you will see how satisfying it is that and writers do it a lot. People who have good story structure, this is what they do. That the ending of the story has this great quality of that we see that, oh, sometimes our greatest weakness turns out to be our greatest strength. That there's this beautiful inversion as the outside problems are dealt with or dissolved and the inside themes come out, and we find out that our hero is the one person who's just ready to deal with things. Wonderful example. And here is just a follow-up question from Rosalind. How much can very personal choices in friendships and what the hero as a friend needs to do affect the outcome and make a satisfying ending? This is one of those questions that always makes me feel like maybe you're thinking of a particular plot, maybe something you're working on, Rosalind. So I say this, take it with a grain of salt, because obviously I don't know the context of your question. But very personal choices affect the outcome and make a satisfying ending. So during the Hobbit, right, who becomes the kind of close allies and friends, beloved friends? Bilbo and Thorin. And what the third act does, exactly what the third act does in The Hobbit, is it puts the two friends on the opposite sides of the war, because it's Thorin, and in a kind of a Shakespearean flex, go Tolkien. Thorin is so proud and so blinded by his desire to get this gold that he believes is rightly his, that he refuses to compromise. He refuses to negotiate. He refuses to listen to reason. He is willing to make a last crazy stand to protect this gold, to defend it. They have no chance. Nobody's on their side. It's just this bunch of dwarves who are now kind of torn, because Thorin has become like a Captain Ahab type figure at the end. He's just blinded by his obsession for the gold. And there's tremendous pain because he is their friend, he's their leader, and he's Bilbo's friend. And Bilbo has come to love and admire him so. And the fact that Bilbo must, in a sense, from Thorin's point of view, betray Thorin in order to bring an end to this war. You see, Rosalind, this is the best answer to your question, is the most personal plot twist, and yet it is inextricably linked to this larger third act catastrophe that Bilbo must solve. When you can design your plot so that the hero must do those things, must make deeply personal choices, having to do, as you know, potentially with friendships and betrayal, and whose side am I on now, and who am I willing to offend? How brave can I be to stand up and speak truth to power? All of those fantastic heroic gestures that heroes make in third acts. I'm Spartacus. No, I'm Spartacus. These are incredible things. They move the reader, they move the viewer. This storytelling soars when we can create a moment like that, where we put our hero on the spot and they have to make a decision that breaks their own heart, and yet they are strong enough to do it. They have the principle. They have become a true capital H hero. They will do what's right, even when it's deeply, personally painful. So that's a great exploration, Rosin. I really like that. Here's another wonderful comment, and well worth bringing into the conversation. So Bilbo ends the war, but that is not the end of the tale either, because there's this beautiful coda, if you will, this incredible descent into back into the personal, which one can only imagine how truthful, emotionally truthful this was to someone like Tolkien, who had returned from the war. Most of his friends were killed. They all went off to serve together. He was one of the ones that came back. And he returns from the war, and we know, those of us who have people in our lives who have served, or no, no people or are empathetic observers of the stories told by returning veterans, how precarious, how full of difficulty, what a difficult threshold crossing that is back into civilian life, right? Tolkien knows this personally and takes the time to include that final difficult challenge in Bilbo's story, because it would be a lie, wouldn't it? To say the war is over, everything's fine. The end. No, you don't get through an experience like that without scars, without trauma, without all of a sudden having a sense that I have changed so much that when I go home again, as Bilbo does, I don't feel that I belong here anymore. And so you can even argue that for all of its fantastically satisfying story structure, super classical construction, beautifully written, it's just a little masterpiece, that there is this gorgeous open ending tacked on to the end of The Hobbit, because there's a bittersweet quality. It is a true work of art. It is a sophisticated piece that ends with a honest psychological accuracy of the complexity of coming home after that kind of journey. Bilbo is not the same fella he was at page 1, and when you bring him back home, the greed is still very much alive in his hometown. He solved it over in the war, but when he gets home, yep, the neighbors are going through his stuff. They thought he was dead, so they're just going to come in and take it. And he's got to sort all that out. And he's lost his respectability. He's happy though. It's a beautiful ending because it includes this emotional satisfaction for the reader that Bilbo's okay. But then there's a couple of threads. There's this troublesome ring that needs to be dealt with at some point in the future, which we all know how that works out. And that he doesn't quite fit in anymore, but he has friends that come visit him. He's a beautiful old retired soldier at the end of The Hobbit. It's a really glorious ending. So I agree with you, Rosalind. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. All right. So my final point, again, wonderful. You're always anticipating wherever I'm going, Rosalind. I love it. My final point about what makes a satisfying ending is just this quality of feeling like it's over. It's not like it ends too soon. It doesn't end too late or too soon. It has a sense of like, nope, this is where this story should end. But we readers have also a belief that the characters continue after the final page, that they've been brought to life in our imaginations in an iconic and enduring way. And so we get pleasure out of thinking about what happens after the book is done, whether it's Reader, I Married Him, and we're imagining what's going to happen to Jane and Rochester after the book is done, whether it's that beautiful ending of The Hobbit where we realize that Bilbo is a little battle scarred, but proud of himself and feels very pleased when his war buddies, when his friends from his adventuring days come by. I think there's some wonderful details about hanging it's like his sword or his armor or something like that. He hangs up, like he puts a few mementos of his service. He puts a few objects around that kind of celebrate and honor all he's been through. And he really loves to have visits from those that he can relive those days with, who understand what they've all been through together. But he's never quite respectable again. So we readers are left with this vision, this open vision, this ongoing sense of like, okay, we get it. We get this like beautiful ongoing quality that life doesn't end just because we close the books. And yet it's not that it's not that the book ended at the wrong time. The story is done, but the life continues. And that to me that's kind of the third category of what makes a great ending that I wanted to share with you guys today, right? So just to recap, because I know we talk a lot in these sessions, and there's always so much to say about story structure and writing. But we talked about an ending that is satisfying both logically and emotionally. We talked about this quality of a great ending having a sense of surprise and inevitability, and this feeling that the life continues even though the story has ended at the exact right moment. So that's my recipe for a great ending. Okay, now let me look at your questions. What else would you like to know about this? Any particular questions? Oh yes, so we're bringing in our favorite character from the Wizard of Oz, Dorothy. How does her third act work, right? Yeah, we could talk about that for a second. We have a few more minutes. So Dorothy's third act, of course, is that she completes her mission. Now, her mission was sort of in two parts because the Wizard of Oz has this really distinct midpoint in the second act. Her mission, since she gets in the second act, she's in Oz, even though the whole first act was all about how horrible things were going for her in her life in Kansas. Things were going from bad to worse quick. But the minute she gets to Oz, she's like, no, 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 I want to go home. And we agree. We want her to be able to go home. So the entire second act of The Wizard of Oz takes her on her adventure, and her mission is super clear. She's going to go see the wizard, and the wizard is who can help her home. All right. She gets at the midpoint in front of the wizard, and he ups the stakes. He changes the rules of the game a little. He said, "Well, I can help you, but first you have to bring me the broomstick of the Wicked Witch of the West." Okay, fine. That's the midpoint. The second act continues with a darker tone, a lot more urgency. Things are a lot more scary, right? But she ends up succeeding with the help of her good allies. And where does she go? Now it's the final ordeal. She presents the broomstick to the wizard. That's it. That's the ordeal. That's the scene that we've been waiting for. She is finally where she has been trying to get to all along. She's standing there. She said, "Okay, I did what you wanted. Send me home to Kansas. Send me home." What happens then? Is that the end of the story? It is so not. Because the wizard is a phony. He can't send her home. And in fact, he so beautifully embodies what we call the shadow archetype in storytelling, which is that he is like the failed version of Dorothy. What does he say to her? I know you all know the dialogue of this movie by heart. Who doesn't? I'm an old Kansas man myself. He got lost from Kansas however many years ago, and he never found his way back. This is what Dorothy dreads. She wants to go home, and the person that she's been thinking, she was told, was going to help her is not only a phony, but he himself is from Kansas and never found his way home. This is a true shadow figure, right? This is like, it's a weird comparison, but this is like Luke and Darth Vader. Like, he's the dark side. This is the dark side. This is what Dorothy does not want to have happen to her. So now she has to deal with the unexpected consequences. Well, it's a movie, so it all wraps up quickly. She has to find something within herself that she had all along that is her true ability to get home. As Terry observes, she could get home all along. So the outside dragon goes away, and this inside dragon. So we talk about the flip between the external mission and the internal theme and problem. Switch places, and so the third act is really all about the fact that Dorothy could do it all along. But does she have to sacrifice? Is there a sense of almost like a death and rebirth in the third act? There absolutely is. I defy you not to shed a tear when she has to say goodbye to her friends. That is such beautiful third act storytelling. Yes, she can have what she wants. And in the getting of what she wants, others got what they wanted too. That is the one thing that the wizard could do. He could award diplomas and, make sure that her friends each got what they wanted. The stability of Oz is restored. They're going to be good leaders. The outside world has reaped a tremendous benefit from Dorothy's adventure, from her hero's journey. That's exactly what we want to see happen in a third act. But in order for her to get home, she does have to sacrifice. And she has to sacrifice exactly the friends who've been so near and dear to her all along. So our emotions as viewers get taken on a satisfying journey, right? Super satisfying. We're glad that she's getting home. We're thrilled that they got what they wanted. We're sad that she's got to give up the friendship in order to get what she wants. It all rings psychologically true, beat after beat after beat. It's totally satisfying. All right. And of course, there's this sweet undertone pleasure. It's a movie. And so this is a fun thing to do, which is that the friends that she just left behind in their guises as farmhands and members of her community in Kansas are waiting for her when she gets home. So there's this like sweetness in the bittersweetness of her leaving them behind. It's like, yeah, but there they are again. They're still with her. It's such a beautiful ending. So thank you, Terry, for inviting me to talk about The Wizard of Oz. Always a pleasure to do that. Classic, classic film. All right, my friends, if there are no more questions, let us wrap up for today. This has been another great discussion. Endings matter so much. And your ending, if you have done the work of story structure through the second act, your ending will be a lot easier to write. You shouldn't be casting about blankly for an ending. The seeds of the ending are planted in the beginning. And why is that? Because it's in the first act that our hero's need for transformation is established. And it's in the third act that final transformation is demonstrated. The second act is the training ground that brings our first act hero into manifestation as the third act hero. So all of it is connected. It's all connected. And, starting to think that way is the key, it's really the key to feeling like you're in control of your craft as a storyteller. So keep coming back. Let's keep having these discussions. It's always a pleasure to talk about writing with my clever friends here who attend live. If you're watching the replay, I hope you'll subscribe to the channel and click the button so that you will get notifications of the coming topics. Please leave a comment and let me know what you'd like me to talk about in weeks to come. I love these comments. Today I'm talking about third acts because somebody requested it, and I'm very glad to do so. And if you'd like to get invited to the upcoming trainings, workshops, and other adventures that are going on in the Path of the Storyteller community, you just go to pathofthestoryteller.com and join the mailing list, and that will be the beginning of your journey with our community, which I have to say is a buzz with creativity, with mutual support, and lots of manuscripts being worked on and finding their way to culmination right now. I'm so proud of my students. They're doing such a great job. So I hope someday you'll be among them. All right, everyone. I'll see you next week.